1942. A squadron reported back and never touched the ground. The war's night smelled of bakelite and cold tea. In February 1942, the sector station kept its patient weather. WAF plotters in headsets, croupier rods touching perspex where grease pencil tracks learned to be arguments. A tote board of serviceable aircraft, a clock whose colored segments ordered the hour to behave. Above the coast, chain homes scanned in pulses that made the concrete hum. In the filter room, a corporal named Green steadied a ruler on the map and watched a thin blue line creep in from the sea. At 2113, the line split into 12 returns, range 62, bearing 086, height uncertain, angels unknown. Radars sometimes saw angels that were not angels, but these moved with courtesy, spacing perfect, speed sober, course clean. Controllers rang the GCI hut. The hut's cathode show agreed. Formation, the controller wrote on his slate, then added the part the knight dislikes. Ident? The IFF bell did not ring. Friend answers friend. The board listened to its own little silence. Scramble. The word walked the room like a cat. Phones woke dispersals. Engines woke air. 2 sections from an inland station rose into the blind, climbing by the book toward a sky that had memorized the book first. Vectors came neat. 300, Angels 10, and the formation bent obligingly toward the intercept like men who intend to meet halfway. Then the returns improved their manners. 12 became 16, 1632. Raid strengthening, the tote agreed, and the map filled with counters that warmed under hands. On the coast, a convoy reported sound in the sky that wrote on water, ripples without aircraft, while in a hamlet, an old horse turned its head and listened to an engine that had chosen not to be seen. At 2131, the controller told his chalk to keep up and failed. The perspex showed the tidy staircase of an approach, then a sudden decision. The formation tilted as one and flew inland over fields where no prop wash touched hedges. The phones asked for heights again. The sky declined to answer. Night fighters climbed through a soup the Met Man called layered like bad pastry. Below, towns blacked out their windows. Above, stars went to ground inside haze. In the first bow fighter, Sergeant Haynes felt the panel hum the note his machine kept for confidence. Vector 325, Angels 12, Control said with practiced patience. Haynes trimmed, watched the AI set whisper its phosphorescent truths, and watched the ghost bar at the tube's edge twitch, undecided. Contact port 2, his observer breathed. The tube gave a smudge obedient as doctrine. Closing speed good, range improving. Haynes eased throttle and lifted the nose to let the quarry fall onto the gun sight like a fact. He saw then what many have seen and few admit with pleasure. Navigation lights hung in the dark, red and green small as clean buttons marching in pairs. He blinked. The buttons elongated into commas, and then into nothing at all. The set lost its temper, then returned as if embarrassed. Other crews reported the same decency. Lights, then a blacker shape against black. Then the feeling of awake in air, a cat's paw over metal. No visual, one pilot said, annoyed at language for its refusal to help. But I have the sense of a wing. The controller wrote that down because paper must be loyal to witnesses, even when physics sulks. Over the downs, Haynes flew through a temperature seam that rang the aerial with a note like a tuning fork and made the cabin smell of pennies. The AI bar jumped, then lay down. "They're climbing," Control offered. "We see 32 now." The tube gave one last smear and erased itself. Haynes put his hand to the canopy as if touching a window a train had just left. The glass was colder than the world around it, as if a large body had passed and taken its heat away neatly. "Disengage," the controller said after decorum had been served. "Return to base." The sky, always professional, returned itself to weather. On the dispersal pan, a rigger swore he smelled hot glycol when no engine had run for an hour. At 22:02, the drome's RT heard a clipped check-in on the home frequency. Call sign of a squadron from 2 counties away, its vowels unmistakable. 3 red downwind, 3 yellow final, the voice reported with the impatience of men who prefer ground. The duty pilot looked into a blackout where runway lamps were strictly unlit and felt his hand go to the switch anyway, as if muscle remembered peacetime. The controller dared 3 low-intensity lamps for 30 seconds, the length of a prayer. Wind sleeve hid itself. The air answered with a roll of slipstream that tugged at grass and then forgot to persist. On the flare path, a corporal stood with an Aldis and signaled a green he could justify later. The sound that followed was convincing to everything but sight, prop wash, tire hiss, the mild clatter of oleos, and then the long, satisfied note of throttles closing in unison. He counted 4, then 8. The Aldis beam painted nothing but dust. In the tower, the log received a line because lines are cheap. Local, Squadron M, landed 22:04, RT normal, visual nil. Beside it, the duty sergeant drew a rectangle for a parking dispersal and left it blank. A runner posted to the peri-track reported wheel marks that could be felt through the soles but not seen by torch. He put his palm to concrete and found it cooler in 2 long lanes, as if shade had understood concrete. At 22:19, the same call sign asked permission to taxi. The control set answered as doctrine dictates. The air moved, grass lay down, the lamps quivered in their sockets, and nothing crossed the watchman's shadow. "Cleared to rejoin," the controller said to a silence that seemed satisfied. On the pan, Chocks sat at attention for aircraft that declined the courtesy. Someone laughed before remembering laughter does not fuel anything. Fuel Bowsers waited anyway. Signals men keep tidy faith. The Y station on the headland logged an RT burst in Queen's English, carrying a squadron code that the watch officer remembered from a ceremony photo. The same minute, a coastal wireless post heard German speech remarking a large formation over water that their own Freya could not paint. The filter room received both and did what filter rooms do, pinned them, drew threads, and waited for physics to confess. Files bred more files. The intelligence captain took the folder named Phantom and made it thicker by shuffling into it things that barely agreed. A convoy report of shadows crossing moonlit swell. A farmer's complaint of frost in furrows where wind ran straight. A balloon the Met man swore rose into engine noise. A saint. A Than fitter's note that a crate had returned with paint scuffed by nothing. He wrote ducting, temperature inversion, sea clutter on the tab so Rumor would not own it. Still, the room behaved like Rumor's parish church. WAF telephonists compared stories at Coco and found their headsets had carried a second, fainter squawk sheet beneath the first, call signs speaking half a breath early. A plotter took off her rings after one shift because the copper went cold on her finger when the 32 returns crossed the river. In the log, a hand not the recorder's wrote where the IFF stamp should go. Absent. One message refused to sit. A strip of RT posted by a coastal tower contained a landing report in the voice of a pilot whose name had appeared on a memorial unveiling the previous spring. The sergeant who had typed the memorial program read the strip twice and said the dead should be left out of paperwork. The captain agreed, then kept the copy. Men who like evidence keep private drawers. By week's end, Phantom held everything and proved nothing. The ops map kept its polite blue counters, and the chalk that once wrote strengthening learned to write simply present. Search began with fuel and ended with patience. Lifeboats ran an east-west pattern under blackout, hearing engines where compasses pointed at nothing helpful. A trawler off Dungeness reported wake lines that crossed theirs at right angles and were not made by tide. On the headland, the beam station, usually stingy, dragged a pencil of light along cloud to give night fighters a ladder. The pencil touched a smear that behaved like exhaust, and then forgot it. A tanker hove to, believing in survivors, and called out to air that had not learned drowning. On land, crash parties drove where telephones insisted. A meadow by a railway embankment showed twin-browned strips and no tracks in or out. The fire engine turned circles on clean grass, ashamed of its tidy readiness. At a satellite field, a mechanic found dust laid in two neat arcs where main wheels would have kissed if anyone had been polite enough to land. He knelt to feel the concrete and said, "Cooler here," then looked around to see if the remark had been heard. The sea sent back proofs in languages none wished to argue. Nets drew up ribbons of warmish water in long, narrow bands. Hydrophones logged screws passing high overhead, as if air were briefly navigable to anything that loved a propeller. A buoy bell rang, where swell measured none. In a cove, a fisherwoman lifted a loop of wire that had tightened itself into a knot not taught at sea, the sort that looks like a letter from an alphabet no one claims. Pilots flew daylight for oil. The oil preferred Rumor. Pressmen asked for wreckage. The sea returned timber and forgot metal. The day's last report came from a boy at a cliff farm who watched a line of small cloud puffs move inland in a formation as neat as a parade and vanish above a chalk pit with a single collective shrug. He could not draw it, so he told his dog. Dogs keep secrets badly. That is sometimes useful. Photographs proved more polite than witnesses. A night camera on the coast, set to catch raiders that never obliged, recorded 3 frames of sky in which only the search beam spoke. Yet on the plate, a succession of small, pale scallops rode the beam's edge as if something had learned to surf light. The lab man, who liked normal, wrote halation on the sleeve and filed the negatives under weather. In the GCI van, A mechanic made a foolish copy of the PPI with smoke-blackened tracing paper for want of a proper printer. The worn circle shows a clean procession of blips bending inland, then doubling, then stepping as if taking a staircase invisible to the countryside that lay beneath it. He pinned it up and then took it down because the chief disliked souvenirs that encouraged myth. Elsewhere, film held its own silence. A bow fighter's gun camera, fitted though he never fired, wound calmly for 10 seconds while the observer tried to persuade the AI to believe. The frames show darkness, then tracers curving as if arguing with a slow stream, then nothing at all. The squadron adjutant screened the reel twice and called it training material in order not to think. The best picture came by accident. A girl with a brownie at her father's garage took a long exposure of the forecourt to collect headlight tracks for fun. In the print, a row of pale ellipse crosses above the pumps, each blur offset from the next as if passing in line. The spacing perfect. An RAF corporal came to ask for the negative and left 5 shillings and a promise to send the print back. He kept the promise. The ellipses stayed. Light sometimes refuses to be bullied by explanations. By week's end, the wall of the ops room held 3 photographs with notes beneath. Halation, radar noise, light leak. The controller, who had written present the night before, added a 4th label under his breath and did not pin it anywhere. Squadron. The plates took no offense. They simply kept their faint ovals and their tidy spaces and waited for some other war to explain them badly. The war ended by paperwork and weather, and the rooms learned museums. In the sector's restored ops room, Perspex shines too clean, and visitors are given rods to move toy counters across a map that once took people out and sometimes failed to bring them back. The tote board reads serviceable in paint that never chips. A label says angels, non-meteorological echoes. It does not say what angels listen to when we have finished naming them. Down on the coast, the old beam station is a holiday let. In some evenings, the hallway smells lightly of hot oil, and a low note seems to live in the skirting, as if a generator had chosen to stay behind and hum to itself. A caretaker tells guests the floor is original. He does not mention that sometimes their glasses tremble a little on the sideboard and fall still when they step into the room. Historians, wise with footnotes, arrange the file named Phantom into better folders, ducting over the channel, partial reflection from inversion layers, ground returns mistaken for height. They are not wrong. The flyer whose name turned up in that R/T strip keeps a grave where people put poppies through wire. The strip remains in a drawer. Drawers learn to be careful with names. Some nights, the radar at the new air control center paints a neat procession that does not file a flight plan. Controllers who have learned gentle languages for oddities draw a box around it and write training. The procession crosses the river, refuses to be counted, turns inland, and fades as if a runway lamp had been switched on briefly in a field, and then remembered itself in 1942. Stand by the sea where the convoy herd wakes without ships. The wind writes tidy lines on water, and for a moment, another furrow crosses them at a human angle and keeps its course. No voices, only generator hum remembered by cliffs, the mild click of a pencil on perspex that is not there, and the old professional patience of a squadron that still reports in, lands, taxis, and rejoins, all without being rude enough to insist on a body.